Hello everybody. One moment please.
Hello, workshop.
Alan, office, now.
Yeah. The boss sounds remarkably happy today. Actually, before I go in there, morning, ma'am.
You know you can call me Monica.
Blimey. Thank you, boss. Sorry, Monica.
I've been reading some comments on some of the videos. A few people would like to know your thoughts about Mk3 Mondeo. What do you think?
I don't think anybody would give a shit what I think.
Well, it's too late. Deal with it. I've just parked the car in the garage for you. Off you go.
Hey, Monica. What's that on your blouse?
What? What's on my blouse?
That little black thing.
That's my new microphone, so I can capture a better audio.
Any good, is it?
Well, it's better than what you're using.
I too would like one of those.
I'm not sure if you're responsible enough to operate such a high-tech equipment. So, you can take that as a no.
Hey Monica, is that a new blouse you're wearing?
Yes, it is.
I love it. You look amazing. Your style is my inspiration.
You know, Alan, kissing my ass cuts no ice with me. But, as you noticed my new blouse, I'll cut you a deal. You can use this mic for this video, but damage it or get oil on it. Not only will you not use it again, Alan, you'll also be looking for a new job. Is that clear?
Thank you, Monica. You're a mate. Woohoo! You see, a little bit of charm goes a long way. You know, the trouble with women, you just need to make them think that they're in control.
Alan thinks he's got me wrapped around his finger, but he is very wrong.
Ta-ra! So here it is, the Mk3 Ford Potato. Believe it or not, the Mk3 Mondeo has been the most successful of all the Mondeos ever made. That doesn't mean to say it is actually the best Mondeo out of the whole range, but it was the times it lived in. So I'm going to have a little talk today about this car because it's a piece of history. Oh, by the way, if you're new to this channel, this garage was set up specifically to fix a fleet of taxis. And you can guess it, over the years, we have had Mondeos as taxis. So today I'm going to give you my thoughts on this Mk3 Ford Mondeo. It's only going to be me doing a lot of talking in this video, so feel free to fall asleep. What a car to have owned. Even today, they still look bloody good. I'm going to take a little trip down memory lane here, and I'm going to start in 1992. That was just before the Mark I Mondeo was released. And this company here, Steve's Taxis, we were running Ford Sierras and Mk3 Ford Granadas at the time. Yep, that was back in the day, the early 1990s. You know, life back then was more interesting. Before all this technology, before this digital age. I like the analogue age. Hell, you know what? I even used to have a scanner where you could listen to the police. You'd have also realised if you had a scanner, you could tune into people's home cordless phones and listen to them having affairs. If it were possible to go back to those days, I'd be there in a heartbeat. So 1993 came around and the Mark I Mondeo was released. This was the first generation Mondeos. But it wasn't until 1995 that we saw our first 6 brand spanking new Mark I Mondeos here as taxis. And they were all in different colours. And it was at that point the boss decided to have all his taxis in red. And a year later, in 1996, I'm sure he purchased something like 20 odd Mark I Mondeos. 1997 come around and they facelifted the Mark I Mondeo. They called it the Mark II, although it was still a first generation Mondeo. I think it's where they turned the headlights upside down. I guess it was on personal taste, but the Mark II didn't look much different to the Mark I if you ask me. Anyway, by the year 2000, that was the end of the first generation Mondeos. Generation 2 Mondeo was released. This one here, the Mark III. The shape of this car was just totally radical to the Mark I and the Mark II. You can't compare them. They were two totally different cars. They may have shared the same kind of chassis and partly some of the same suspension, but you would never guessed that this was a Mondeo. And these second generation Mark III Mondeos, they ran from 2000 to 2007 to when the third generation Mondeo, the Mark IV, was released. And the Mark IV ran from 2007 to 2014. Do you kind of see a little pattern here with Ford? The Mark I's would last 7 years. This second generation Mark III lasted 7 years. The third generation Mark IV Mondeo lasted, you guessed it, 7 years. I'm wondering if the Mark V Mondeo is going to last 7 years. You know, for a car that has gone out of production over 12 years ago, there's still an awful lot of them around, and a lot of them are in very good condition still. Yet you compare that to the first generation Mondeos, where are they? I don't see any anymore. I think they're all in the scrapyard, if there are any kicking around. And you've got to remember, the Mark I and Mark II Mondeos were technically advanced compared to a Ford Sierra, but they seem to have lasted 10 years and they're all gone. It's a bit like the Austin Maestro, if anybody ever remembers them. They just rotted away. And within a space of so many years, they're gone. You don't see them anymore. And that's the case with the Mark I generation Mondeos. But where these Mark IIIs come in, they seem to be lasting a bit longer. Yep, Ford certainly got it right when they made the Mark III Mondeo. It was a big improvement over its predecessor. Although I will say their idea for opening the bonnet is a pretty shit one. So unless you had the good fortune to own an ST220, you'd probably end up with something like this. A 2-litre petrol Duratec. You know, as 2-litre 16-valve petrol engines go, these are a good engine. I do have to say, they cause very little trouble, they very rarely go wrong, as long as they're looked after. The biggest problem I've come across with these 2-litre petrols is this inlet manifold. There is a series of flaps inside it which open and close with your throttle, and they get worn and loose inside the manifold, and they start rattling around. And the worst case scenario, which has never actually happened here, but they can break up and enter the engine and destroy your engine. And another real annoying thing about these petrol engines, underneath this manifold, there's like a crankcase breather pipe, and they split and they suck in lots of air, and you have to take the manifold off to change them, and they're an absolute nightmare of a job. But apart from them few little problems, these petrol engines have done ever so well. And one of the nice things about these cars, if you wanted to change a headlight bulb, you would pull 2 clips out and the headlight would just pop straight out. Why couldn't they have done that with the Mark V Mondeo? There's not actually much I can say about the petrol engines. They were good engines. And I can't really comment on the ST220 V6 engines because we never had any here. I would love to have had a diesel, a 2-litre Duratorque diesel engine here in a Mark III Mondeo to show you. But I can't. We have none left. They're all gone. But if I go back to the year 2000, this company had a batch of, I don't know how many, there's probably about 10. They were Y-Reg, brand spanking new, Mark III Mondeos, 2 litre Duratorque. The TDIs, not the TDCIs, because the TDCIs were the common rail fuel injection system which followed on later on. They were the quick ones, the rapid ones. But no, we had the basic slow ones with the old mechanical diesel injectors in them. No, they weren't fast cars, but boy did they last. And these engines, these were the 2 litre chain-driven 16-valve diesel engines. And we'd never seen these engines before, so we never knew whether they were any good or not. But as it turned out, they did turn out to be a bloody good engine. They lasted ever so well, and I can tell you now, by the time we got rid of them cars, probably about 4 years later, they had racked up between 300,000 and 400,000 miles. And I can't actually remember ever one of them engines blowing up. And I think that's probably due to the fact we replaced the engine oil when it was supposed to be replaced. I don't even think we were even using the proper oil in them engines. I think we were using a slightly lower grade. Because a lot of you, if you've had any dealings with them 2 litre diesel Duratorques, you'll know that when you took the inlet manifold off, it could be absolutely full of bloody thick gunge. And yeah, that was the case with our cars. We never bothered cleaning them out. We just ran them and ran them and ran them, and they kept going. I think they were absolutely fantastic engines. These cars are on the go day and night, all the time. They hardly ever stop. And a lot of the taxi drivers come and go. They don't give a shit. They all thrash the hell out of these cars. I'll tell you what we did have though, which was bloody annoying on these engines. These were the first time we ever come across the dual mass flywheels. I'd never seen that before. And before I even knew what a dual mass flywheel was, when one of these taxis come in, where the starter motor wasn't working. So we thought, oh, the starter motor's duff. So we pulled the motor out of the car, and it's full of bloody metal filings, really fine like metal paste. And we didn't understand it, so we just cleaned it out, put it back on, and a few weeks later it's back again the same problem. When we eventually took the gearbox out, then we realised what a dual mass flywheel was. That was the shape of things to come, unfortunately. And on the subject of dual mass flywheels on a Mark III Mondeo, I'm no expert here, but we had a guy come in with a 2 litre diesel, and he wanted a solid flywheel conversion fitted to his car. And he had bought a kit off eBay. So we fitted it, he went away, within 2 weeks he was back, and he wanted a proper forward clutch and flywheel, dual mass flywheel fitting back. He said the vibration in that car was so bad he couldn't live with it. So we kind of thought, and we'd been thinking about maybe putting solid flywheels in these cars at one point, but after seeing the results of a solid flywheel in his car, we thought we better just stick with the dual mass flywheels. But the dual mass flywheels in these Mark III 2 litre diesels, they would last from like 80 to 150,000 miles in some cases. If I compare that to the Mark IV Mondeo, the 1.8 TDCI, they were regularly rattling them flywheels at flipping 70,000 miles. Here's another thing that was really, really annoying on these cars. Only on the diesel version. The petrol versions are fine, just the diesels, the alternator belt. If you ever had the serious misfortune to have to replace an alternator belt on one of these diesel engines, they were just one horrible design. So we used to leave these alternator belts to last as long as they possibly could, and in a lot of cases they would last over 100,000 miles before they needed replacing, which was good because I bloody hated changing them. The diesel injectors in these TDI engines, I don't actually ever remember having to change any of them injectors at all. They just lasted. They were never an issue. And in like 2004, we must have had another 20 of these Mark III 2 litre diesels, and they were all the TDIs still, the slow version. But you know, flipping heck, later on, when we got the TDCIs, the common rail fuel injection systems, well, if you got 100,000 miles out of them, you were lucky and you were doing well, because it was like £1,000 to £1,500 to replace a set of injectors in them TDCIs. They were very, very quick cars, I must admit, but they just killed the injectors. And all the bloody slow cars we had, not once did we ever have an injector problem. Not once. Trouble is, if you didn't mind having a slower car and you try to find a TDI model of one of these Mark IIIs today, you'd probably struggle because most of them out there now are the TDCIs. And if you buy one of them cars, you've always got that worry of the injectors playing up. And when they play up, they basically dump too much fuel back to the tank. And so as soon as you put your foot down, it throws the car into limp mode. And you have to pull over and switch ignition off and get started again. Otherwise you can't drive anywhere because the car's going too slowly. But you can get injectors a lot cheaper these days from motor factors. The only trouble is, sometimes it's a bit of a lottery whether they actually work or not. There were a few annoying little jobs we had to do on these Mark III Mondeos. Water pump was one of them. Having to take the inlet manifold off, the power steering pump off, and then getting your hands down there, and you'd get your arms all absolutely covered in grease replacing one of them pumps. It weren't a very nice job at all. The exhaust gas recirculation valves in these cars were quite problematic as well, but at least you could blank them off. I bet you can't blank off an EGR valve on a Mark V Mondeo. Right then, I'm going to stick this Ford Potato on the two-poster ramp. Just for future reference, in case you want to know, I'm going to show you a few bits and pieces underneath. Just a couple little bits underneath. Don't worry, I shan't bore you too long. The brake pipes would prolifically rot underneath these vehicles, especially alongside the driver's side of the fuel tank, and then where they run over the top of the rear axle and off to the brake hoses. These handbrake cables were very common for seizing up, and they would keep your handbrake lever pulled right in so your handbrake wouldn't work. You'd genuinely know something was wrong because your handbrake lever would come right up. And lastly, the rear subframe bushes. You see, the bushes that held these subframes to the chassis would split from the metal casings, and you'd find the whole subframe would start to rattle around. We used to remove the entire subframe to change the bushes, but it was quite easy to get them off. We just found it easier to do the job. If I had £1 for every subframe bush I replaced on a Mark III Mondeo. But really, these cars drove well, they handled well, and suspension was bloody good. You know, one thing I actually do like about these Mark III Mondeos, and it's not just the Mark III, it's any Mondeo, or any Ford really, they seem to have the steering weighted just right. Yeah, and when I walked up to one of these cars for the very first time and looked through the driver's window at them instrument clocks, it was like, wow, they look sporty. It just looked really flash. If you ever owned a first generation Mondeo, you might have realised the front seats were a little bit on the flimsy side. But these Mark III Mondeos, the seats were a lot more comfortable and a lot stronger. And as these cars were destined to be taxis, they were spacious in the back with plenty of headroom. But yeah, I think the interiors in these cars were pretty nice. But there again, the only new cars I ever really did see were Mondeos. So that's it. If you loved the 1990s, the best decade ever, then the Mark III Mondeo was a fitting beginning for the new millennium. See ya. You can wake up now, it's all over. Bye.